Thanks for joining another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Scott Warr.
And I'm Don Freeman. And today we're going to be running with and talking with, it's going to turn out to be a friend of ours and a friend of yours. He is the author of the book, Ultrarunning for Normal People, Life Lessons Learned on and Off the Trail. You'll learn about Sid Garza-Hillman. He's a writer. He's a podcaster. He writes, or he does a podcast, What Sid Thinks. He's a speaker. He's a health coach, a running coach, an oxygen advantage breather instructor, a certified nutritionist.
We need to hear more about that. I need to hear more about that one.
My favorite thing.
He's a certified nutritionist, a race director, and you may have run his race, Mendocino Coast 50K. And this year they're running it April 4th, 2024. Strike that, Ryan. And this year he's running the Mendocino Coast 50 on April 20th, 24. So here we go. Let's talk about your book, Ultrarunning for Normal People. My first question right out of the chute has got to be, let's define normal people. I want to see if I fit into that, or I just want to know if I'm normal or not.
When we line up at the trailhead on Saturday to go for a training run, I don't say, hey, here's a group of normal people.
I know. Well, first, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be here. And anyways, but yeah, so normal people. It was the one hesitation of the publisher was like, we don't want to like make anybody mad. And I was like, listen, normal means not an elite athlete. So what it means is your main goal is to have a good experience with the race, but it's not about the time and your place in the roster. It's like, can I train for it well, have a really good experience, recover well, and be able to do more in my life and more ultra marathons. So that's the pocket of a normal person. Yeah, somebody recently like, Sid, you're not normal. I go, no, I know, but not like that, But as an athlete, I'm fully normal. Like I'm not an elite athlete, not a particularly good athlete, but I do ultra marathons. So that's kind of the idea of the book.
And that does fit about all of us, right? I mean, not many of us. There's only 3 of us that are going to stand on a podium at the end of the day, but we all gain something from that experience, from the race, from start to finish. There's something waiting for each one of us out there if we're paying attention.
And I was going to say, Sid, before I butt in, I think in the book you define normal people as people that don't do it necessarily for a living or a focus in their life, 100% focus in their life. They have jobs, they have kids, they have family, they have other hobbies. And so they're juggling other normal things that maybe the top 15 or 20 athletes that are running a race don't necessarily have to prioritize.
That's right. And look, elite athletes may have all those things, but for them, running is a major part of their lives. And for the normal people, at least as I define it in the book, it's a thing we do, but it's not the thing we do. And so the idea is, can we be living on paper pretty normal lives and pull these kinds of things off? And the answer is yes, because clearly if I can do it, anybody can do it. And that's not false humility. That's the truth. And and so that's the idea, is it's to like invite more people into a sport that they think there's no way they could do, but they really can.
Well, you sent us a copy of the book that we were able to read before we had the podcast, and I've got to say, a great read. You're a writer. You've written 3 other books, and your good practice before this book was put to use because it's easy to read and it speaks to our language. So these are the things that we talk about and live, and really, frankly, the reason that we go out and buy a pair of trail shoes and show up at a trailhead on the weekend is because of the things you've written about and the observations you've made in the book. So I think anybody listening to this enjoys this podcast, or at least the topic. There's a lot more that we weren't able to uncover in the period that we're speaking. It was a fun read.
Oh, I appreciate it. It's supposed to be, it's supposed to be accessible to normal people. So again, it was like the focus of the book was to make it something people would want to pick up, people who aren't even ultra runners or maybe even haven't entertained it,
Right.
Hey, Sid, you're a race director, so you rub shoulders with a lot of experienced runners and new runners. For those people that are listening to the podcast that are diving into this episode thinking, I'm thinking about going ultra and I just don't know whether it's possible. You mentioned something just a minute ago that if I can do it, other people can do it. How approachable is trail ultra running in your opinion?
I think it's like super approachable. Obviously people have geographical limitations if you're living in the middle of New York City, although I've gone on a trail run in Central Park on single track trails that I didn't even know were there. A guy took me out on a run once. I was like, there should be an ultra marathon in the middle of New York. It'd be incredible. But yeah, it's super accessible. And again, I think that part of what stops us is, well, there's fear, and there's, fear of success and fear of failure, and, what will people think, and I can't do it, and this and that. But there's also just the idea freaks people out. An idea of an ultra marathon, it completely seems out of most people's wheelhouse, and it is accessible. It's actually absolutely accessible.
So Sid, if a marathon is 26.2 miles and an ultra is considered longer than that, so a 50K trail run, what makes those two runs so different? And why should someone consider, like, I'm afraid of the ultra stuff, but let's talk about the differences between the distance besides besides the feet we measure. So
right, yeah, and I will say that I've talked to actually a bunch of people who say, I've done a marathon, but I can never do an ultra. I'm like, well, 50K is only like a little bit more, but it's on a trail. So to me, and I've been thinking about this even since I wrote the book, and then it was at the publishers, and I was stewing about it for a long time. And it's weird because it's a marathon and an ultra marathon. They seem very related, and there's definitely crossover. But to me, in my mind, they are very different things, more different than I maybe even realized when I set out to write the book. The trail running experience is a unique experience. It is something, and I'm going to generalize here because I'm sure there's some marathons on roads that are similar to this. I don't know, but they're in every ultra, or most ultra marathons, I would say trail ultra marathons, there is time where you were alone on a trail. There's time where you can't run next to somebody. There's time that you can't talk to anybody. And I just ran a race last October, the Lake Sonoma 55K. And I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 85% of that race, I was alone on a trail. And I didn't even see anybody else. There was times where I was like, I don't even know if I'm lost, and then there'd be the marker, that's a very different animal. And I say that on purpose because one of the things I felt when I was introduced to the sport very late in my life at 46 was a very animal kind of feel, this feel of being on a trail. It was this very raw experience that I really think is incredible, and also something that more people would benefit from if they felt it. And so, yeah, to me, they're very different experiences.
And one of the differences, that come to mind as you were speaking is the aid station, right? At an aid station on a marathon, you hope to grab the Dixie cup and hope it hits your mouth as you go by. But at an ultra aid station, you stop and you talk to friends, and you fill up your pack, and you think of a reason maybe to wait for the guy coming that was behind you a short time ago. It's a completely different experience.
Unless you're an elite, in which case you get the crew and they jam you out of there, right? But if you're just a regular person, you hang out, you take pictures, people are socializing, they stop at the thing, get their backpack out. It is, until people do it, and I would want more people to do it for the good of all mankind. But the more people do it, the more they realize it is a different thing.
And to that point, walking or hiking is a strategy in an ultra marathon, and a smart move with all the elevation changes. But if I run in a marathon, if I'm walking or fast hiking, I feel like I've let myself down, or I'm not keeping up, or everybody else is running by me. But we clearly have an accepted strategy in our sport that it's 100% okay to do a quick hike or a hike up a hill. That's part of what we do.
Oh yeah, it's not even okay. It's advantageous.
Right.
It's like on a physiological efficiency level, it's advantageous not to try to run a hill that you could probably hike just as fast and not expend as much energy. So yeah, it's a completely different mindset. People do a marathon. First two questions: did you run the whole way, and what was your time?
Right.
And when people tell me they did an ultra marathon, I have never asked somebody's time. I could not care less. I go, holy crap, good for you. I mean, I guys, that's amazing. You finished it. Great. I couldn't care less about the time.
That is so common. I love that you say that, because I completely agree with you. Sid, I'm curious. This seemed like a very personal book to you. You have a lot of personal stories and anecdotes. What is your relationship with trail ultra running now, and how did it become where it is today?
It came out of my experience with the first two and only marathons I've ever run, which were the year before I did my first ultra. So I was 45 years old, and I was, eating pretty well, feeling real good. And I thought I'll run a marathon. It seemed the next logical step. I'd done a couple halves in my day, whenever. But didn't really like the training for it, the pacing. It's just I always actually funny thing is I always enjoyed running. I would run 2 or 3 miles as a recreational runner, but I always liked it. And I didn't like training for the few races I did, 10Ks and half marathons, because I didn't like having to pay attention so close to it. I didn't like having to mark my pace and I'll look at my watch. I actually didn't like that from the very beginning. So then I do the marathons and I'm in that same pocket of the training plan and the watch and the pacing and and then the second one I ran, I followed this guy holding the sign with the 9-minute pace because I wanted to have a time limit that I wanted, and it just wasn't fun. I didn't finish those going, oh, I can't wait to do another one. Coincidentally, I come across an article in Men's Health. I run a wellness center, and the guy who owns it, Jeff Stanford, with his wife, he gave me an article written by Christopher McDougall, who went on to write Born to Run. And in that article, they talked about trail running. And that was literally the first time I thought, trail running. I did not know people ran on trails. I had no idea. So because of my experience with marathons, I thought, let me sign up for one of these things. It was that kind of whatever, that was literally like that. Yeah, okay, whatever. So I signed up for that. And everything started coming up about that level of challenge, which in my mind still is. It's pretty gargantuan, but can we wrangle that kind of thing? What was my experience getting on trails? I remember my first trail run. It was not very long, but wow, it was such a cool, free, liberating, don't look at your watch, pay attention to what you're running around. Great. Loved it. So that's just because the love has stayed along the way. The love has stayed along the way.
Mm-hmm. Did you, once you read the article and said, I want to try this, how long did it take you to find the tribe? How long did it take you to find similar people that you could train with and prepare for this goal that you had?
That's actually a great question that I've never been asked, and the answer is never did. And part of that is and so part of that is I live in a pretty remote area. There's not even the race I direct. I might get 10 runners in the whole county, and maybe like 3 or 4 that live in the area. One time I was running on Highway 1. I was trying to get a 20-miler in, and I don't know the trails, and I get lost. So at this point, I don't know the trails. I get lost, and it's a thunderstorm. So I'm running on Highway 1 in a thunderstorm, and this truck pulls up in front of me and kind of cuts me off. And I was like, God, what's going on? Is this an altercation at hand? And this girl pops out, and she goes, hey, do you ever look for people, people to run with? And I said, yeah, but I'm training for a 50. Thinking she's and she goes, oh, I just did 100. I go, we're good. Anyways. And so coincidentally, her name's Sid, but a longtime horse rider. So she's all of a sudden, she knows all the trails. So she starts taking me on the trails. So that was my into finding out the area and what was going on here. But that's it. There is no running group. I mean, there might be, I'm not a big group guy anyways, but no running groups. It's Sid. She moved out of the area. So my runs are solo. And I got to tell you, I've come to appreciate that aspect of it as well. And I'm somewhat in the community as a race director, but I'm not really that much also. And so this has become for me part of that individual solo solitude kind of experience, even when I'm in a race.
That's one of the things that came to my mind when I was reading the book is the single track. How wonderful the single track is. It can be a time that you spend solo. You're by yourself. It's contemplative. You can think through problems, or you can just listen to the rhythm of your feet, or you can pay attention to, nature. Or there's another purpose or function of that single track is when you bring on a group of runners and you're in a conga line, you're in a pace, and there's the magic of momentum that just pulls the whole group through. It's the same trail. It could be the same spot, but when you start to add people to it, it becomes something different and I think unique and something wonderful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's been times I've gone out with small groups, and I do love that dynamic, but I love that in ultra or trail running anyways, you're on a trail and there will be times even when where it's quiet. And you go on a 10, 12 mile run with a buddy, there's some time where you're just kind of doing your thing and together you get into this kind of rhythm that is quiet still also. And it's just, I don't know, it's such a cool thing. And then you're not dealing with traffic and stop signs and stoplights and stores and, you're just out there, and it's something special, as you know.
Yeah, I think there's a yin and the yang, the community, we talk about how great our tribe is and our community is, but I think if you've done this for any amount of time, you have to spend time alone on the trail, especially if you're training for something. You're not going to find a training partner or it's going to be really hard to find a training partner to train all those miles and all those hours without without doing a lot of it on your own. And so that's where you get into the mental side of it, right? And communicating and finding things out and working things out. Yeah. I think that's one of the things, like, I agree with you. That's one of the things I love about it, is that quiet time where you're away from your phone and your computer and you can just think.
That's right. And I think you have to train to do that. At least I did. It was not easy for me to go out. And I made a decision when I was training for my first ultra that I've stuck to ever since. I don't train with things in my head. Like, I don't train with AirPods or earbuds. I don't put anything in my brain. I wanted to see if I could do it, and it was very hard to do. It was easily as hard to do as it was the physical part, to just go out in silence. And then over time it got easier, and then over time it got preferable. And so that's been a weird, unexpected result of trail running, has been my desire to go out with nothing. And in my head, and even when I'm with friends, you're talking, and my phone's in my pocket. It's not, kind of thing. So I really, really dig that aspect of it as well.
As you guys were talking about partners and finding someone to run with, the 3 Ps came up. Well, they became 3 Ps because I wrote them down. But finding that person, and that's not one of my Ps, but finding that person, it's not only the pace that you got to meet pace. You've got to have someone comparable so that you both have had a good workout. You don't want to have the guy on the podium and the guy in the back of the pack. You've got to match pace, and you have to match place. Certainly, you've got to make sure you're in the same vicinity so you can meet at that spot. And there's also personality. You've got to connect with that person. You can't have someone that's competitive, or maybe if you're looking for someone competitive, then you need somebody competitive. You've got to find the right people so that you enjoy the time. So the miles just kind of spin away, and it's all of a sudden, wow, we're time to be done. And that's nice about finding the right person.
Yeah, and I actually would argue that 100% you're right about that. And I would also argue that, and this is why the book's not trail running for normal people. It is ultra running for normal people, because there is an aspect to going the distance where you're broken down. I talk about in the book about being broken down in a good way, when all of a sudden what you think might be a personality trait that you don't lock up on somebody with, or political bent or some crap like that, it all goes away. And we start to get back to the human experience of being tribal, of being part of something with other people physically and not on social media kind of thing. And as I saw the world, and I see the world moving into not less technology, but more technology, not more socializing, but less socializing, like more social media or more news or more whatever. I see the need for something like trail running more important than ever. And so much more important than exercise. I can't even tell you, like the experience of ultra running, the experience of trail running has nothing to do with VO2 max or muscle, whatever, endurance. It has everything to do with the human experience that I think is going away. And I think trail running has a special place to solve that problem. But what stops people is, again, this thing that's too big for me. I can't do it. There's no way I could do that. And I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, and I bring this up to both of you, not just for you to answer here, Sid, but Scott to weigh in too, is that something happens out there on the trail where the personal facades are let go, and discussions come up, and you say things out on the trail that you wouldn't at a bus stop or a doctor's waiting room or even at work. It's a safe place, and running that many miles, you just kind of shake a lot of that stuff off, and you feel safe out there to share and solve some things. At least that's the way it's been for me.
Well, me too, and it's because of time. It's the reason why I love podcasts. Because it's a dying art to actually have a conversation that lasts more than 10 seconds, and that isn't through a keyboard. So these little things that work, I feel like we have to intentionally grab them back, because they're leaving unless we make an intentional effort to pull them back into the fold. And I think that these kinds of longer term human experience is a dying art. There's a book I always talk about. This guy Cal Newport wrote a book called Deep Work. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a great book, and it's about how this ability for us to even stick with projects long term. He's out of Georgetown, he's a PhD. We're popcorn brain. We're swiping, and everything is partitioned. And I think trail running has is a unique place to stick with something for a while, and really kind of get past all the crap, and then down to that kind of nice, quiet, calm control that's missing.
It seems like you've been doing this for how long now, Sid? A couple decades?
Trail
15
running?
years? Yeah.
9 years.
9 years?
Yeah, I'm 55.
The title of the book, the subtitle is Life Lessons Learned on and Off the Trail. What have you learned in the 9 years of trail running and ultra running that you have helped you with life and made you a better person?
The first lesson in the book is to move through fear. So even just signing up for an ultra marathon, the first one I did was the American River 50 miler. Ever since then, I've just done 50Ks, but even so, and just to coexist with, again, coming back to that sort of intentional move into discomfort, that intentional challenge. We don't have to do it. Nobody has to run there's no survival mechanism that we have to go 50K to get to where we need to get to. There's no reason for it, right? And so learning to do that. The second lesson, to slow down. And this was the thing in my brain was when I was doing the marathons was there was pacing. But all of a sudden, I got my head on straight about trail and ultra marathon. I was like, I don't care what time. Like I actually realized, like, I don't care. I'm not trying to podium. I'm not even trying to finish a certain place in my age group. I just don't care. And I had to ask myself that question. Is there a goal of mine? I was like, no, I got kids and I got a job and I write books and there's things I want to do. I don't want to put in the work and micromanaging training to get to, number 2 in my age group. It has no interest to me. So to slow down and to gauge my feeling in my body and mind during training to know if I'm pushing it too hard was probably one of the most eye-opening things for me. I was a guy who followed a training plan no matter what I felt like, because it said to do it, and so you do it. And it was to my detriment, both psychologically and also one time physically. I ruptured my Achilles tendon because I had to run run that day because it said so. So loosening up in general on the training, to be more versatile, to take a day off. These are things that I had a really hard time doing and still do. I still struggle. I just know where I stand on it. So I sort of go, I'm taking a freaking day off, no matter what I feel the pressure to run that day. And it's just made a huge difference to me in terms of I have a long view. I want to keep there's people over 70s that finish my race every year. I want to be one of those guys.
So I have a question on you. It was your first lesson. There's no reason that I need to be doing this. And I think we've all had that thought in the middle of a race. Why finish? I'm at the turnaround. I could easily get a ride back at this point. What do you think pushes us? What is inside? You may have had time to figure this out on some long solo runs. What pushes us to just keep going?
Or even in Sid's case, I think you wrote about your experience at AR50 where you were at the starting line.
Oh yeah.
And you're thinking, why am I here? Why the reluctance of even starting the race?
So what is that, Sid? What makes us do it?
Well, first of all, yeah, and what's funny about that, Scott, was that I did have that, and that's not a joke. I stood at that starting line and thought, this is the last thing I want to do today. And I had been training for a long time. And in the training for that race, I had run the way too cool 50K and and that was fine. To me, it was a training race. I was like looking forward to it. But that morning I was not feeling well. I was exhausted of the American River. And I literally was like, I don't want to do. My wife was back at the hotel. I was like, I do not want to do this. And that was 11 hours and 52 minutes later, kind of thing. What I think there's a certain human look, there's probably social pressures and personal pressures that we put on ourselves to, we sign up for something and we want to finish it. That's all fine. But I think there's something magical to testing your mettle to that limit where you feel like you want to quit and looking for a way out. And I think that when we try to even find that way, even if we fail on a given day and we don't find a way out, we really need to not finish. That's okay. But even that we look for it taps into this kind of strength that's in all of us anyways. It's there already. And when we get ourselves in a situation where we get a glimpse of that strength, that's where the boots are on the ground. And that's the thing that brings us back to the sport, I think, time and time again, once we've done it the first time.
And I will put it out to both of you to refute this or not, but that is a human condition or a human trait that all of us, normal people, I'm doing air quotes right here, normal people have. this desire to push ourselves to see what we can do. It's not just the elites, not just the ones that have the really low VO2 maxes. It's there. I think at some level, all of us want to do better and to challenge ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that we normal people have in common.
I think, and I agree, I think we're in a conflict because comfort is so easy. It's at least in this country, it's like with the phones, it's at our fingertips. Comfort is easy. We don't have to, we're in temperature controlled climates. Food can be delivered. You don't have to move anything for it. It's all there. We have the comfort for most people, but we're actually happier when we're sometimes in discomfort. And that's a weird place for us to be in as a species, where we have to go acknowledge that when we work hard, we feel better, but we don't have to work hard, and so that's the draw of junk food. That's the draw of social media. That's the draw of temperature control. That's, those are the draw of movies, entertainment, and news. And I do all those things, but can we balance that with a little bit of grab of intentional discomfort? And I think we're better off. I think we're happier for it. I think we're happier when we are tested, but we have to test ourselves because people aren't testing us anymore. And so we have to test ourselves, and we're happier for it. But it's a weird thing because the comfort side is so easy. It's right there.
Yeah, Scott, I'll add to that. Just this Saturday on a run, I had a choice of going left and back to the car, or right to do an additional piece of the loop. And I knew going right meant longer, harder, but I wanted to do it because there was a reward if I got it done. The reward was just, I felt satisfied. I felt fulfilled. I felt like I was able to do it. I didn't bail. I did it. So that's why I took that extra loop. And if I didn't, and I turned the easy way, then I would have failed in my mind. This is the tug of war that I have internally, right or wrong, whether I should be on a doctor's couch laying horizontal. I don't know, but it's that reward failure thing that's a tug of war, and I want to be a winner. And so that's why I took the extra loop. And it would have been very hard to go back to the car. Sometimes I wish I didn't have that problem, but I don't even know if it's a problem. I think it's just human nature.
Well,
don't believe him, Sid. Don't believe him. It was not a choice. It was not a choice of left or right. He got lost.
Oh,
he was on a unfamiliar part of the trail, and he accidentally went right. And he when he realized it, he goes, "Oh, now I have to run a little bit longer." And that. So don't believe what he said.
I can make a good story out of this. Anyways, but yeah.
Sid, do you listen to a guy that wasn't there? Can you believe he wasn't even there?
He wasn't there. He just knows you. But and so it's funny because when I coach clients, not in running, but it's a stress management thing called Small Steppers. I have a phrase for it, what you just described, which is called the after feeling. And what I am training people to do, and in myself too, is you knew, regardless of how you felt at that moment, that you would feel better afterwards. And that comes with, so I'm a cold therapy dude. Okay. And I don't want your listeners to get all, but the science on it is emerging. This is not like a slam dunk yet, but it's kind of exciting. The science is coming out. But for me, and I've been doing it for 6 years every day, getting into a 39-degree tub on my deck every morning. It is a challenge mentally of not wanting to do it, getting in, knowing that I'm going to feel better when I get out. And it's at that little moment. And what you just described was, I'm going to go this way. The feeling is the comfort of the car. The feeling is your body going, you shouldn't do this. You should go back to the car. It's all comfortable and you don't have to move once you're in there. And your mind going, if I do this thing, I rationally know I'm going to feel better when I'm done. And that's that thing. That's that little game that we play or not play. And people who try never to play that game, I think, suffer for it. People who do try to play that game, to test their mettle a little bit, even if it's in little micro moments every day, feel better for it in the long term and the short term.
Did you have a term for that that I missed? Was there a term that you used?
The after feeling.
The after feeling.
Yeah, so when I like clients with like junk food, like they'll go the draw of junk food, let's say. So then I'm like, okay, I'm a nutritionist. I'm like, healthy food I'm not anti junk food. I'm just saying it shouldn't do what you do most of the time. And so I go, this meal that you're going to eat tonight, healthy, isn't going to taste as good as the junk food because it's not engineered to, but over time, you're going to know that after you eat it, you're going to feel better that you did it that time. That's the after feeling. You get to know what it's going to be like after you do it, so that even if you don't feel like you're doing it, you're going to do it anyways because you make yourself feel better doing it. Does that make sense? It's I refer to people as the after feeling.
That's a gold nugget for me, by the way. If you're keeping score on your TRN bingo card under the gold nugget, that's the spot that I put my my little bingo piece on, was the after fueling. Thank you.
Feeling. Yeah, the after feeling. Yeah, the after feeling.
Feeling.
And that after feeling lasts much longer than the brief moment of satisfaction. I mean,
correct.
The time that it took me to run that extra bit of the loop didn't take near as long as how good I even still feel good about it. It's several days and I'm still feeling pretty good.
Yeah. Now here's the only catch about this, and this is, again, comes with experience. But there could be a day, Don, in the future where you turn left because you're just not feeling it that day, and then you'll know on that after feeling, like you got back to the car and you're like, I'm glad I didn't push it. I'm actually really feeling tired, and that can be an good after. It's self-knowledge, it's self-awareness.
100%.
So yeah, you get to know yourself and go, you know what? Because I've gotten better. I'm not there yet, but I'm struggling. But I've gotten better at doing less, because I was the guy who always pushed him. I was always the guy who turned right no matter what in a disconnected space. It wasn't like I checked in with myself and felt I feel good enough to turn right. It was I have to turn, a compulsion. And now when I don't turn right sometimes, I'm like, oh, that was the right decision that day. And
that's deep.
Yeah, that's wisdom. That's experience, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's the old saying, live to run another day. You can bury yourself, you can injure yourself, you can take yourself out for a week or better just because you took the extra loop. That's dumb. You have to make a sound decision. Is this healthier for me or not? And so that becomes an argument or an escape clause, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think healthfully, you should be able to make it and make it for a good reason. It's not always good to go harder. I agree with you. I'm glad you brought that up, because we don't try to promote that.
Yeah, that's been probably my main struggle is that. And sometimes you miss the mark. Sometimes you go left, you go to your car and you go, when I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd done the longer one, but you sort of chalk that into your experience and go, next time I'll have a better idea, or vice versa.
Now, lesson number two that you learned from Scott's very good question was, you've learned to slow down. And it made me think, why is slowing down so hard to do? It seems like it seems just the opposite. It seems like that would be an easy thing to do, but it's not. We go to a race and we do just the opposite. We have to be disciplined to slow down.
Yeah, I don't run with a watch. I haven't run with a watch in years, except for with one exception.
Wow.
And usually it's the day before my race when I run my race. And I only wear it to make sure I'm going slow enough. I run it with this guy, Skip Brand, who owns the Healdsburg Running Company. He wrote the foreword to the book. And he's a much better runner than I am. And usually in the first 2 miles, I go, Skip, I got to slow down. And immediately. And that's so hard. Because when I had a coach for the first 2 months of training for my first ultra. This guy at Indiana, he just had a Google Doc and he kind of monitored, named Matt Flaherty, a pro runner, but he's good with people who are like me, don't have a goal of winning, just want to have a good experience kind of thing. And I had no idea what I was doing. So he kind of set me on the right idea. And then I finished the rest of training myself. But that was one of the first things he said to me. He's like, you got to slow down. And I was like, well, I can run 8-minute pace pretty easily. He goes, not for 50 miles, you can't. So there was the mindset shift of, oh, wait, this is a different thing. And deeper than that is, I don't care about the time. So what do I care about the 8-minute pace? So then all of a sudden I'm going 12-minute, 13-minute miles. And all of a sudden this like machismo thing comes up and I'm like, am I that guy? Like, oh, I could run faster. All this, it was amazing when I slowed down. I felt better after runs. My recovery was faster after runs. I was able to think about things more because I wasn't so like uncomfortable with the stress of the run. It completely changed the game. And it folded into that, again, to my goal, which was to have a good experience, not to improve. I just did a podcast. I said, do you want to improve your time or do you want to improve your life? And trail running, ultra running for me is improving my life. I don't care about the time. I really, I cannot stress to your listeners enough. I really don't care. I want to be the 74-year-old woman who crossed my finish line last year and goes tromping off to have a beer. And I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. Instead of people who go, well, that's what happens when you get old. It's okay. Well, talk to the 74-year-old woman who killed the race, because it's a different mindset when you're thinking kind of long-term like that.
That connects. That just real quick, Don, that as you're talking about that, Sid, it just connects with an episode that we recorded just recently, actually just came out a couple weeks ago, where we did a chapter review on Outlive by Peter Attia. And he talks about this health span versus lifespan, and how can we improve that last 10 years of our life. It takes a conscious plan and strategy so that you can be healthy and continue to do the things that you want to do through the end of your life. Like this 74-year-old woman, don't blow your wad early. Slow down so that you can do it for the entire lifespan.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Unless your goal is to place, in which case push.
Yeah, go for it.
Micromanage your diet, micromanage your training, hire a professional coach, and that's all. There's no judgment. It's just that's not where I live, and that's not where I ever lived. And I thought I had to live in that kind of micromanagement place, and once I realized I didn't, and I was better off for it, then I started really more enjoying the sport.
This is the third lesson from Scott's question. What have you learned from ultra running over the years that you've been doing it? And lesson number 3, and the final one, is learn to take a day off. Speak to that a little bit. Learning to take a day off.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably under the versatility lesson. To be versatile.
Yeah.
And there was this time where I was speaking in Wisconsin. I had a speaking thing in Wisconsin, and this is like the second month of my training, so I was still working with that coach. And I texted him. I said, I don't know what to do, because he had the week laid out in the Google Doc, and I've still never met the guy personally, but that's kind of the cool part of technology. He was able to coach me from afar. But he goes, I'm going to be in Wisconsin. I don't know whether trails are around. I've got a busy schedule. He goes, whatever, take a few days off. Either take some days off or just run where you can. And I was like, well, wait, because again, in my mind, I just come off the marathons. So in my mind, I'm like, but the Google Doc said, yeah, and it really was hard for me to wrap my brain. I thought if I take a few days off or run less, that's it. I won't be able to do the run. And that's just not true. I mean, physiologically not true. That we all have taper weeks in the middle of our training anyways, but it was such a I can make this up kind of. And once I understood the rubric of basically how to train for an ultra, I've never used a coach or a training plan ever since. And I've had great race days, but not by time. So again, because I'm not trying to win, a great race day for me is, do I enjoy the outdoors? Do I meet some cool people? Do I have some good food? Do I have a beer afterwards? Do I go home and recover and I can go back to work on 2 days later? Great race day. And so that was the versatility piece for me, that I realized I can let go of this. Now, I was in Colorado last week and I did some book dates. And one guy goes, well, you shouldn't say that, because you're telling people they can just show up with a bottle. One in the book, I talk about an experiment I did where I just showed up with a bottle of water and didn't know anything about the course. It was like the 4th ultra I'd run on purpose. No backpack, no nothing, just to see. And I had a great race day. He goes, and I said, it's an experiment. He goes, you shouldn't tell people. They're going to think they can show up with a bottle of water and just run an ultra. I go, but no, because I was trained. I was trained to run that ultra. It wasn't like I never ran and then showed up. I'm not an idiot. But I did not follow a training plan. I got my feet on the ground, but I just didn't have a chart. I ran, I pushed it on a day that I had more time. I ran more on other days I didn't run as much. But I came to that starting line prepped. But I liked the freedom of not knowing what the course was going to be like, not having to pack a whole backpack full of a bunch of Band-Aids and T-shirts and socks and powder and gels, and just thought, I'm just going to eat off the aid station. And if I don't finish, it was a total experiment, but it was a great race day. I had it was best, still to this day, the best race I've done in terms of the fun of it, the experience, especially leading up, because the training was so loose, and I could do all these other things in my life and still train and be successful at an ultramarathon. It was an incredible experiment. But I also said, when I got interviewed afterwards, I was like, I wouldn't recommend this to anybody on their first ultra. I didn't have the pressure of finishing one. If I DNF that day, it was failed experiment. That's fine. But it wasn't my first ultra. So I wouldn't recommend it, but it was kind of cool to let things go and see if I could still pull one off.
You're speaking Don's language here.
Yeah, because and you brought this thought to my mind, and I remember it from a mentor that we all gather along the way, and he talked about intuitive training. Go out there and do what you feel. You go longer if you feel it, go shorter if you feel it, skip a day if you feel it, eat just listen, learn to turn and listen to your body, and then try to reach your goal. It not only happens with training, but intuitive running. And it sounds to me like that's what you did on that, just a bottle in my hand. You realized what you had, where you had to go, where the next aid station was there. And they probably had a trunk load of different types of fuels to keep you going. So just being intuitive and figuring out, here's what I have to work with. Here's what my body feels like. And I looked at the course. I've got a pretty good idea of how long it is. How long can I survive like that? So intuitive training and intuitive running.
Correct. And I actually didn't even know about the course. So I had no idea on purpose. I didn't know about the elevation, nothing. And you're so right. But a couple of things about that. People sort of throw out the listen to your body. I think that takes time because we are often mediated by data. So again, I'm a nutritionist. I'm for intuitive eating also, but you can't just all of a sudden go, I'm gonna listen to my body. I had a girlfriend in college when she goes, I must need calcium. I'm craving Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I was like, I don't know if that's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. I wasn't a nutritionist. But I was like, that doesn't seem right. And so I think it takes time, that self-knowledge, that self-awareness to get into that place where, and I quote Courtney Dowalter, you guys know who that is, one of the greatest of all time. She doesn't have a coach. I heard her interviewed on Rich Roll's podcast. She goes, I leave the door and I see where my legs are going to take me that day. Meaning if she's feeling it, she doesn't do a long day that day. I'm like, that is so liberating and awesome of a mindset. It's so cool to see one of the best runners, if not the best of all time in history, not be militant about training.
And I think you're right on the money. You can't be intuitive until you have the experience. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, I'm thinking about doing a 50K or I'm going from a half marathon to a marathon or whatever that next distance is, you may need to follow the spreadsheet for discipline reasons to keep the consistency and the discipline. And as you're going throughout this, to Sid and Don's points, listen to your body as you're going through the training plan. Listen to your body, learn how your body feels. Don has a great example. I'm going to have you tell it, Don.
I don't even know what it is yet, Scott.
I know. I'm going to tee you up here. I'm going to tee you up so you can have a long drive off. It was
that time you turned right instead of left.
I know. You see, Scott really keeps me guessing. When he's not there, he doesn't tell a story about that. Go ahead, Scott.
No, this one I'm going to tee up. At one point in Don's career, he was a bodybuilder, and tell him about the coach or the friend of yours that taught you how to listen to your muscles. I've heard that probably a half a dozen times, and it still resonates with me.
What did I say?
Because I don't know whether I can do it. You were saying that as you're lifting, as you're doing a curl or as you're doing a press, you need to listen to the muscle.
And well, there it is. And Joe said, "You hear that? You got to listen to the muscle." We all end up with mentors along the way, and we were working out. He had more experience and bigger, and in fact, he had a mentor himself that worked out with Jack LaLanne back in the 50s. So this was passed along for a while. And he said, "We're working biceps today." He said, "You need to listen to that muscle. You need to listen on the eccentric part when you're letting it down. You need to listen to it stop." And then you need to listen to the muscle contracting all the way up, and you need to hear what it's saying. Where do you feel it? Is it burning? Is it, how hard is it working? Just listen to it and isolate that muscle contraction so you can feel the bicep working. Don't start cheating and using accessory muscles. Really focus on being strict and using that bicep. And I started practicing as, 35, I don't know how many years ago, a bunch of years ago. And I just moved that same philosophy forward to running or hills or downs or,
so cool.
Anything. I learned that intuitive listening to your body, to fueling, to hydration, to electrolytes, all of that stuff, learning to turn inside and listening.
Well, that's so cool. And the thing I would add to that again, while ultra running and trail running is so spectacular in this regard, is because to listen, to hear something, it has to be quiet enough for you to hear it. And I think that there's something about being on trails that is quiet, that not having AirPods in and, whatever, not feeding your brain for 5 seconds without music or podcast or anything, just for those kind of moments, you can actually hear stuff. And that to me is it's, again, easier said than done to say, listen to your body. But boy, you had somebody actually say, okay, do this. Because if you hadn't done that, if you hadn't had this guy telling you to do that, you wouldn't have shut everything out to actually do that. And that's a challenge that we have in the modern world, which is, can we make things quiet once in a while so we can actually hear what's going on? because we often don't. I follow a guy occasionally. His name's Tim Sheaf. He's a parkour guy, one of the fittest guys I've ever seen in my life, and a stellar runner also. But he has like an exercise plan he says fiber by fiber. And he does these slow movements where you feel every fiber in your body, every fiber on the muscle that you're working,
wow.
The thigh or whatever you're doing, going upstairs like super slow. But again, we do is we go as fast as possible, but he goes, one by one up a stairs. So he goes, feel every fiber of your muscles. That's the stuff that I really love.
Yeah, so turning in and listening to those things, because a bicep sounds different than a pectoral muscle, a tricep, a shoulder, a calf. They all have their different ways to communicate, or different feeling that they have, or different duration that they can continue pushing through. And depending on different level of fitness, if you're at the peak of your game, then they can go further. If you're just re-entering, then of course they don't have the same threshold and they'll fail sooner. But the same lesson can be applied to running. There's times that you're the best fit and you're able to do extremely well and run, for very many miles without feeling the fatigue. And other times you have to really back off. And it comes from that experience of, when I do this and I start feeling this, then this happens.
That's
and
right.
Until, to Scott's point, unless you've done that enough times to say, oh, that's when I start to cramp. Oh, that's when I start to end up bonking. And so, coming to thinking about that, and this isn't a pat on the back, we're just talking, this is safe on the trail. It's been a while since a bonk. Well, maybe it's because I haven't pushed hard enough, but because I can see it coming, right? I go, oh, this isn't good. I'm just gonna hike this next mile or 2 miles because I don't want to go there. I can start seeing it coming. It's like, this isn't good. So I better change something right now because I'm going to end up in a bad spot.
Yeah, I the phrase I use for that, I've seen this movie before. I say that with clients who start getting militant about food.
Yeah,
I go, you've seen this movie before. You've done 10 yo-yo diets before you started working. We've seen this movie, and because that's with the experience. But are you able to be aware of it? So the warning signs as you're on a trail, because you've seen that, you've paid attention. Right, is what I call in the book wild attention. It does trail running again does a great job of making you in an attentive state without having to try to be, because the terrain dictates that for you. And when you can actually listen to your body, you can make those decisions. You can get to know the warning signs before they become danger zone.
That's good. As earlier I said, a bicep sounds different than a calf muscle, but when being thirsty has a different sound than electrolytes, than calorie deficit, than, negative chatter from pace. They all have their different languages. And if you're quiet enough, to your point, Sid, you can hear it. If you try to block it out and turn up music, or, there's times that you need to draw in and listen. And sometimes if you're running with somebody and they're not talking, it's not because they don't enjoy the conversation or the human they're with. They just need to get inside and listen and see what their body's saying.
That's right. That's right. Love it.
Hey, Sid, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. As we're learning a little bit about you, one of the things that you have in your certificate pile is Oxygen Advantage Breather Instructor. You got to tell me what that is. I am so intrigued to know what that is. I think we all breathe oxygen, but you're saying we can do it better?
Yeah. So Oxygen Advantage breathwork. Yeah. Breathing instructor. It was, have you guys heard of Wim Hof?
Yes.
Yes.
It's crazy. Okay. So the whole reason I do the cold tub thing is because I took his 10-week course in like 2016, so I do his breathing every day, and I get into a cold tub. That's kind of that whole thing. But as I was researching more and more about breath, what I ended up training under was this approach called Oxygen Advantage that has an incredible effect on, for instance, endurance. So it's kind of a cool thing. And it's an approach that is focused. I don't know if you know about the Wim Hof thing, but the Wim Hof is essentially hyperventilating. You're doing a pretty rapid breath in and out of the mouth, and then you hold on the exhale, and you hold it until you're, I can go 2 or 3 minutes sometimes on the exhale. But Oxygen Advantage is a nasal in, nasal out, and it's working to desensitize the body to CO2 to allow a little more CO2 to exist in the bloodstream. This is probably getting a little deeper than you might want to go, but the end game is having a little more CO2 in your bloodstream actually releases more oxygen out of the blood into the tissues. So we're very sensitive to CO2 because we exist with a very little amount, because we're over breathing and we're blowing out so much CO2. So Oxygen Advantage teaches people over time to get less sensitive to it. CO2 is the thing that triggers us to breathe. So when it gets a little high, we go, oh, we gotta breathe. So becoming less sensitive to it allows us to be existing with a little more at any given time and allows us to be better oxygenated. So it was a very, very interesting foray for me and has become more important to me than nutrition and running. It's the first thing I teach people is the breath work, because it has such a great effect on stress and anxiety and improving sleep and endurance, that once that's dialed in a practice, then they are able to make changes in diet or fitness and things later on. But I love that as a backdrop. And so that's why it's so important to me as a coach that I go out of the chute with that first and then secondarily. Now, on a practical level for me, I now know, since most of my runs are solo, I now know when I'm running slow enough when I can breathe in and out of my nose the whole time. So the only time I ever switch to mouth is if I'm on like a real high trail, a real steep incline, or, whatever, some amount of stress goes up, I'll switch to mouth. But for most of my runs, it's in and out of the nose. And if I can't pull that off, I slow down until I can't.
So let's explore just for a moment the advantages of just nasal breathing only. Compare and contrast. Would you say there's more benefit to the runner, or it has equal positive effects for non-running part of your life? And it wasn't a very good question, but if you can somehow find a question in that, can you address that?
Both. So yes, endurance runners use it, but so do mixed martial artists use this particular one, Oxygen Advantage. But for me, and again, I don't train runners. I am a running coach, but my clientele is the stress management side of things. So for me, on the stress level, the anxiety level, the improved sleep, that's the name of the game for me. However, it does have an effect on endurance as well. And so athletes are using this approach. But again, for me, it's athlete and non-athlete alike get benefit from a more functional way to breathe. The reason I got trained in this one is because, unlike Wim Hof, this is training people how to breathe functionally in terms of the natural way we're designed to breathe most of the time. Whereas Wim Hof is like a thing you do, you're done after 20 minutes and you move on with your life. But Oxygen Advantage is affecting how people breathe most of the time. And that's why it's been a game changer for me.
I'm gonna take a chance here of looking foolish but no one would be surprised if I do, so it's all right. Any stories with someone using a CPAP machine and then learning this technique? And I'm not saying anybody can substitute and get rid of their CPAP machine, but does it improve breathing efficiency so that you could move beyond that and use that technique?
In theory, yes. I have never had a client on a CPAP machine, so I can't speak to it directly. I will say that functionally breathing, even when you're not asleep, is going to be advantageous for you physiologically. By the way, on a nutritional level, the lower our stress, the better our digestion. So again, can breathing affect digestion? Yeah, it absolutely can. When you manage your stress overall, the body works better. It doesn't work better when there's no stress, because that's impossible. But when there's managed stress, everything works better, which is, by the way, back to my coach telling me to slow down. That's why it worked better. I was able to all of a sudden pull off longer mileage and not being tanked for the rest of the day, not curled up on a couch shivering for an hour and a half, which is what would happen when I do a long run when I was training for my marathon, because I was pushing to the point where I'd get through the run, but it was at a cost. When I slowed down and managed my stress, then I was able to actually increase my distance and not feel the negative effects.
So this improved functional breathing, last question on it, just any correlation or anecdotal evidence with migraine headaches and having someone learn to breathe more efficiently, better oxygenated. Have you seen any of that or heard about it or, secondhand information?
Have not. I wish I could speak to it directly. I've never read a study on it. No. My gut instinct though is that, again, all systems, and migraines are one of these weird things that, like, they haven't really pegged down. They don't, it's so hard. But in terms of the bigger picture of the human body health, when we breathe functionally, there's a really good book called Breath by James Nestor, if you ever had a chance to run that, where he's a journalist and he kind of goes into different modalities of breathing. And that's honestly where I found out about Oxygen Advantage was in that book. And so I did some exploration, and then that was the one I chose to train under. But it's incredible what the effect is on the body just in general, but I can't speak directly to migraine.
I mean, it's one of our essential nutrients, right? Oxygen. And when did anybody teach anybody how to breathe? You know, it's just you get slapped on the butt in the beginning.
You know, what's funny is we have to learn to do it again. And the thing I love about Oxygen Advantage is not a new way to breathe. It's the way that we were designed. We're nasal breathers. We would breathe through our mouth when we have to be, when we're on an intense level of stress. So this isn't, oh, I've got millions of years of evolution, we have to invent a new way to breathe. This is in the context of the modern world where we're all a little bit too stressed. Can we train ourselves to breathe more functionally once again? Can we bring that part back? But see, I'd make the same argument about getting on trails. That's a natural thing for us, to be outside, to be moving around in ways that aren't repetitive motion that we do on roads. Can we bring, it's not a new way of doing things, it's actually a return to the old ways of doing things. And can we do that sometimes? And do we benefit from doing it sometimes? And I think yes.
Hey, thanks for tolerating all my questions there.
No worries. I love it.
It interests me.
No, for sure.
The book
Scott to sleep. You see,
the book is Ultrarunning for Normal People: Life Lessons Learned on and Off the Trail. It's a really fun book to read. It's a quick read. It's 150 pages or less. And if you want to learn anything more about the book, order the book. Learn more about the breathing techniques and all that, you can go to sidgarzahillman.com. Of course, we'll link that in the show notes. But you also have a podcast, and I love the title because it gets right to the point, which is what we should probably do, like a universal name change of all the podcasts and just say what Sid thinks.
That's right.
Tell us for somebody who wants to tune into this podcast, what are they going to get themselves into? What do you think, Sid?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. This is actually my second podcast. My first one was called Approaching the Natural. It was based on my first book. And there was a certain category to it. And I played it out. I did 222 episodes, but at that point I thought I'm kind of said what I have to say. So I stopped and I thought that's it for me for podcasting. But then I started having ideas. And so the what Sid thinks means I do and talk about whatever I want. And that it just opened up my category of like, this is just what I think. So sometimes I'll just go into whatever area. It tends to come around to health and stress and everything, because that's just where I live. But it's pretty much anything. Anything's on the table.
I think that's what Scott and I have done. You know, we've had a few episodes in Trail Runner Nation, and I can't think that all of them are just about running. You know, because we wouldn't have been able to continue on. So
that's right.
We've enjoyed mixing it up and appreciating the audience letting us, introduce new topics.
That's right. Yeah.
Sid, thank you so much. If you're interested in the Mendocino 50K, you can't get in this year.
Yeah.
It's being run on April 20th of 2024. Mm-hmm. So you could go. Do you need any volunteers for the race?
I always love volunteers. And by the way, I feed everybody. So you could even come to show up and watch, and you get to eat. That was a thing when I created the race. I was like, I want this to be a thing that is, you don't check off your number. You show up and you have a beer and food, and I don't care if you're there, they're just curious. So yeah, we'd love volunteers. And the best thing to do is get on the mailing list, because only thing I do is announce to the mailing list when I'm opening registration. That's what I do every year. So you can go to the MendocinoUltra.com and sign up for the mailing list, and you'll get a notification when I open registration. Sometime around November usually.
And so that's a great way to get into it. I think many of us got into ultra trail running by going and volunteering at a race and seeing what it's about. And boy, there's not a trail race that's probably more beautiful and scenic as that Mendocino coast. So go volunteer for that, and then get on these mailing lists so that when registration opens, it's not a lottery, it's first come, first serve.
That's right.
And maybe you can get in for the 2025 race.
That's right. Yep. Cool. I love it.
Sid, thanks so much for joining us here. We really had a great discussion and a lot of fun. And this discussion made me think that no matter where you go, if someone is a trail runner, you've got a lot in common with them. We just picked up the conversation and like we've known each other for a decade.
I know.
I love it.
Yeah, it was so cool. It's so great to hang out with you guys. It was like a philosophy discussion, and I'm always ready for that. And it was very cool. Thanks for having me on.
Well, lace up your shoes and go out and run.
Mas.